What's up, guys? My name is Zach, and today I am driving a 1993 Dodge Spirit. Up front is a 2.5-liter inline-4, and down below is a 3-speed automatic transmission. Now, I am super excited to be driving this Dodge Spirit for two reasons. First of all, I've never driven one here on the channel, and you guys know I'm always trying to bring you new and unique vehicles. But the second reason is the fact that I think this is a really interesting transitional period for Dodge, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. But if you would like to submit your own vehicle, you can head on over to my website, zackpradel.com/submit. It's a quick and easy submission form. It takes under a minute to fill out, and I come out to you. But let's get back to that 2.5-liter under the hood. Well, this was a Chrysler engine from the mid-80s to the mid-90s. And by looking under the hood, this looks very much like an 80s car. The engine just has that design appeal to it. Looks like something pulled out of the 80s because it was. Now, there were several other engines offered here in the Spirit. You could also get a 2.2-liter. You could also get a turbo 4-cylinder, and you could get a 3-liter V6 from Mitsubishi. So very cool to see the amount of options you could get here in the Spirit. Like I said, paired to it is a 3-speed automatic. It's doing fine. It's not loving its life right now, but that's okay. And last but not least, of course, the Dodge Spirit is front-wheel drive. So how does it feel to drive a Dodge Spirit? It's pretty boring. It's not very agile. Throttle response isn't very, well, responsive. Visibility is very good out of the front. Love to see that. Of course, thin A-pillars for the early 90s. And I'm not having a bad time. It's just really nothing remarkable. It's a Dodge Spirit. Here it is. I think part of that also has to do with the fact that this is a stretched K platform. This is known as the AA platform. It's gained a little bit of weight from the other K cars that I've driven, like the Dodge Aries that this replaced. And so you definitely feel that while driving. But hey, who hasn't gained weight in the last couple of years? With that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the interior. Well, in front of me, I have 4 gauges. Off to the left is my coolant temperature and speedometer, and off to the right is my fuel and battery voltage. I assume the RT version of the Dodge Spirit got a tachometer, but they didn't give that to you in this Spirit, so they just said, hey, keep a close eye on your fuel, I guess. On the steering wheel, we do have an airbag. 1993 is the first year that legally required them here in the United States. But we also do have cruise control and horn buttons. Really low slung grips sort of reinforces a cruiser mentality as opposed to a sporty one. Off to the left, we have a climate control vent, our headlight switch, and our rear defrost. Moving on to the door, we have our latch to get in and out and crank windows, and that's it. Moving into the center, 2 more climate control vents and a giant shelf. Cigarette lighter, climate controls, very, very simple here, not easy to mess up. And our radio, love these older Dodge radios. I love looking at them. Bring me so much nostalgia from my childhood. And I do love that this does have bass and treble adjustments, even though this car has crank windows. I guess music was more important. Then we do have slide out cup holders, so we will do a big friggin' bottle test here in the 93 Dodge Spirit. And of course it fails. I wasn't expecting it to pass, but I am genuinely surprised that it had cup holders at all. And so, that's a slight win in my book, but an overall fail. Then we don't have a center console, and we get this nice bench seat. So the seats do touch one another, and we'll talk about this later on with the design of the vehicle, but I find it rather interesting. The seats themselves are very cushy, very comfortable, and I am pleasantly enjoying myself today. However, speaking of seats, we do have back seats. So let's go do a back seat review. All right, so we're on the back of the 1993 Dodge Spirit, and a couple of things to note. First of all, this does have a sagging headliner, very typical of vehicles from this era. Now in the modern day, most of the headliners fall over time, just the cheap glue, heat, all that stuff. So with that in mind, actually my head wouldn't be hitting the ceiling if the headliner was still correctly in place, but knee room is fantastic. My knees sitting perfectly straight up are not hitting the seat in front of me, and they still have 4 or 5 inches before they do. Really, really love to see that. I don't get a center console or anything in here, and you can notice right here, this is the third brake light. You could tell that it was such an afterthought because it was still a new regulation. It was only required in 1986 onward. They weren't really sure how to integrate these yet, so kind of cool to see that. Otherwise, no headrests, nothing of that sort, but plenty of space back here, and I'm genuinely surprised by that. I always thought of the Dodge Spirit as a more compact car, and it certainly isn't huge, but from back here, I might as well be in a Lincoln Continental. That's a nice spot to be in. Let's hop into the very back. We'll take a quick look at the trunk and cargo space, and then we'll talk about the looks. Right around the back of the Dodge Spirit. And here we have it. Still a pretty decent sized trunk. American cars of this era still had good sized trunks, although you could see how it is starting to get a little bit smaller, and those rear wheels definitely do eat up into the space. But other than that, no crazy amenities, no crazy, well, really anything. Nothing really interesting back here, but that is the trunk of a Dodge Spirit, in case you were wondering. Now we gotta talk about the looks, and honestly, I really like the look of the Dodge Spirit, and I know that's probably not the most common sentence you'll hear with this vehicle, but I don't know, I think it looks relatively good. It's modern for its era, although the back we'll talk about in a second isn't quite modern, but I just think it looks good. It looks conservative and handsome, but not overstated. And that's a nice spot to be for a little economy car like this. However, with all of that being said, let's get on to my final thoughts. What do I think driving this Dodge Spirit? Well, like I said, the driving experience has been nothing special at all. This is a very unremarkable driving experience. I think it's boring, I think it's mundane, and even driving it here now over 30 years later, it doesn't even have a fun nostalgic driving feel. It's just boring. However, I want to talk about this car as a design. This car is a 1993, but the Spirit debuted in 1989 and ran until 1995. I truly believe that from 1987 until 1994, that should be considered its own decade. That's where we got a lot of the synthwave and vaporwave, and that's where a lot of nostalgia comes from. And so with that in mind, you start to notice interesting things about this car. Yes, it has a modern curvy look that was a departure from the K cars, but look at the rear roofline. Much like the 95 Mercury Cougar I recently reviewed, it has a boxed off rear glass. That is very characteristic of the 70s and 80s. Take a look under the hood. That feels and looks very much like an 80s car engine. Take a look at the bench front seat. It looks like it's trying to mimic the style of the older, larger cars that came before it, but it's entering the modern era where it was two separate seats. This car is one big transition, moving from the 80s into the 90s and into what we now consider the modern era. The Spirit acted as a liaison into the 90s, but it couldn't shake its 80s roots. It's sort of stuck in between. And I think that that's just an interesting case study, if anything else. If you want a clear example of what changed from the 80s to the 90s, well then look no further than the Dodge Spirit. And yes, this car has seen better days. It was actually off the road, sunken in mud for 16 years. But it's back on the road today. So in that regard, maybe Dodge should have named it the Fighting Spirit. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Huge thank you to Carl for letting me take out his Dodge Spirit. I was so excited to drive this vehicle. This is such an interesting era. Carl is absolutely wonderful. I've reviewed tons and tons of his vehicles here on the channel before, so I'm sure you've seen some of them. He's wonderful to work with, and I look forward to the next time that we do so. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys.